Hey Spartans. So I'm back here again, and obviously I'm doing something a little different with the background. Just thought I'd try something out a little different for this one. Um, so I wanted to kind of sit down and talk about something a little different than usual. I know usually it's more politics and it's more gaming stuff or just random opinions about things, and this is going to be some of that too, but from a different angle, one that you're probably not used to hearing from me. But it's something that I mean, with everything going on lately, and it just seems like it gets worse and worse and worse. It's something I've thought about a lot, off and on over the years, but I've never really put it into words. So here's me putting it into words, and there's going to be a lot of words. So I understand if you can't sit through all this, but I feel like I need to get it out. So, you know, I, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that over the past, many years, I've seen a lot of people profess to be Christians and how their Christian faith motivates them and how everything is about God and everything they do in their life is, praising Jesus. But when you actually look at what they do with their life, about the things that they say and the actions they take, the things they put on TikToks and Facebook posts and all this stuff, it doesn't look like someone who follows Jesus Christ as much as they maybe think they do. I mean, I see them yell and lash out at minorities. I see them scream about people they don't agree with, how they should be locked up or have their life and job taken away from. I've seen some of them say people like that they don't agree with should be killed. Um, I've watched pastors on shows cry out from their pulpits about the moral decay of the country and how we all need to be getting our guns and take our country back for Jesus and for the church. Um, I've seen other people use, you know, this book right here to argue all sorts of things that compassion is somehow a bad thing for people, that they should just get out and get a job, um, that minorities that we should bring back separation for blacks and whites and brown people, and it should just be um, all separate, and we shouldn't have no mixing of the races. And I've seen people like this say that the civil rights movement was a terrible thing, that women should just be submissive and get back in the home and stop worrying about having jobs and careers. They should just be popping out babies and keeping the house clean, keeping the dinner hot. Um, God, what else? I mean, I've seen them use Bible verses to take things out of context to defend slavery, to defend gun deaths, to defend sentencing women to that have abortions or try to have an abortion to death. Um, I've seen them somehow use the idea that when Jesus said turn the other cheek, that means get your AK and get ready to use it. Um, there's the whole seven mountain mandate thing and all that hateful stuff about how Christians are supposed to take control of the country and the culture, and we're supposed to rule over everything because that's what the Bible says, that Christians are supposed to rule over everything. Um, I mean, all the while, a lot of people who spout, I mean, not a lot, but the biggest ones that spout this stuff, a lot of them are getting paid by millionaires and billionaires who are just pushing their own ideals and their own agendas. And, people who just listen to this stuff, just gobble it up and preach it and go on. Just say the same things. Um, I mean, I like to think though I know a little bit about Christianity. I I was taught Christian values, Christian stories. I was taught from the Bible for 20 some years. And the rest of the time after that was, my own study of the book and history behind it and historical context of the peoples and the groups that actually these stories actually sort of talk about and where these stories came from. And I'll be honest, a lot of it, I don't believe it like I used to. That's for sure. But there are parts that I think are still very valuable and that I think have played a role in my life for sure. And there was a lot of good I took away from it, especially in my early years. But the kind of Jesus I hear these people talking about, they're not the Jesus that I heard about. I mean, by the logic I hear some of these Christian nationalists, these right-wing people talk about, I mean, you would think there was some kind of Snyder cut of the Bible where instead of Jesus taking his cross all the way up to be sacrificed, that he instead started smacking the Romans in the face with it, knocking them back, 20 feet, and then taking the crown of thorns and shoving it down on Pilate's head just before he puts a spear in his side. And then goes John Wick on all the Pharisees around him. I mean, I see pictures of Jesus holding AK-47s in one hand, a baby in the other, draped in the American flag, and I'm just like, what is this? I mean, they make it sound good. They use a lot of Christian words, a lot of religious sounding words. They say things like, well, my faith compels me, or well, my personal relationship with Jesus, because that's what it's about. It's about that personal relationship. Or they'll say something like, well, I only speak truth in love now, I mean, I know what I'm saying might sound hard for you to hear, but I only speak the truth out of love for you because this is what Jesus said. When in reality, Jesus didn't say any of the junk they tried to push. And sometimes they talk fast and they try to make it all, they try to jump around from one thing to another, trying to keep you off balance. It's not teaching you about faith or religion. It's just debate prep. They're not having thoughtful conversations. They're just trying to get gotcha moments and zingers so they can declare some kind of victory, like they've won some kind of contest. That's not how you practice faith. I mean, that's how you win a speech class or something. And some of them are really good at it. I mean, you get on there, you can see all kinds of videos, people going back and forth about things, and some of them are really good about keeping you off balance and trying to get in those little one-liners real quick, before you really have time to respond or even think about the thing that they were talking about 5 things ago. And again, it's not, if people were out there really trying to teach people and have a thoughtful conversation, that's not how you do it. You don't do it in an aggressive way, trying to beat the person point by point really quick. No. A lot of times you listen and then you talk. Then you listen again. And that's how I was taught all about this stuff. I mean, I grew up in a small little non-denominational church in a small little town in Eastern Kentucky. And it had a hard time keeping pastors. I was pretty young at the time, and I didn't really know what was going on or why. When I grew up a little bit, I realized that a lot of it had to do with politics, like all things, and infighting in the church between the deacons and the pastors, and, couldn't get everybody to agree on whatever it was. I mean, I don't recall there being any huge scandal of any kind, just small town politics. You know, some people didn't think this was appropriate or that was appropriate. And so, you know, had a hard time keeping people. But they did eventually keep one for a while, for a number of years. I can't remember exactly how many. But throughout most of my, you know, young to older teen years, he was there. And when I think of a pastor, what a pastor should be, or a preacher, I think of him. I do. Looking back, you know, I was a young kid, and he was a young man. I mean, you know, him and his wife were still young. I don't know how old they were exactly. I mean, thinking back, you know, I'd imagine they were probably late 20s, early 30s, something like that. He wasn't very tall, wasn't short, you know, average height. But I remember he had an easy smile. It was very warm, very inviting, easy to talk to. His wife was the same. They had a couple young daughters. Um, I can't remember, or I never knew the actual real controversy that made him leave the church. But again, it wasn't anything terrible, because it wasn't like he was just there one day and gone the next. There was a slow, you know, transition there. But you know, he well, whenever I think about like a typical pastor family, that's what I think of. And, you know, thinking back, I never remember, or rarely ever could think of times when he actually preached at us. You know, he never did any of the hiccup sermons, you know, like some of the Pentecostals or some other church denominations do, where they're just like, and the Jesus and the gods and the people and everybody came. You know, he never did that stuff. He didn't scream, he didn't yell, he didn't go crazy and get all huffed in the face or writhing on the floor. You know, or it looked like he was about to explode every Sunday for an hour. No, he just taught. He just taught. He spoke calmly, thoughtfully, with reflection. He never this quick jumping around from one thing to another. And I learned, and I took notes. I listened, and you know, the Jesus that I learned about from him is something totally different from what I hear Christian nationalists talking about today. And this is a Jesus that I want to share. You know, I want, how can I say this? You know, it's a Jesus that's not, he's not void of compassion and empathy. He doesn't justify putting people or women in their place. He doesn't justify ignoring the suffering of migrants and immigrants and other people around you. He doesn't accept things like the NRA, that a few people are just going to die every year, so we have our Second Amendment rights. Jesus wouldn't do that. And that's the Jesus that I want to say a few words about. Not this bastardized version that people wrap up in an American flag with a gun and an AK like he's some kind of Rambo or something. And I don't know how long or how often I'm going to want to do this, but today I do. And I want to start with empathy, compassion. Now, the word empathy doesn't really strictly appear in the Bible. Languages are weird. And being what they are, sometimes they don't really have a direct verbiage that translates really nice and neat. So instead of being someone who tries to play with different, Greek and Hebrew translations and how this means that in this specific verse, with this specific translation and all that junk. That stuff's important, don't get me wrong, but it's not important to what I want to the stories that I want to tell. And these stories, they're in the book and you can read them. And let's just go over a couple of them real quick. Let's start with the Good Samaritan. Where is that in the Bible? Well, you turn to Luke chapter 10, 25 through 37, and you basically find the meat of it. And let's just read through it real quick. So this is a lawyer, or depending on the translation, it might be a little different. This is my old Bible, so it's a King James version. I know it's not the best, and it's not the easiest to understand at times, but that's what I learned with. So in my passage, it says it's a lawyer. I assume that could have been a Pharisee or just a wise man or a rich man or whatever. A man, somebody. It doesn't matter who, somebody. Verse 25 starts with, "And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted Jesus, mind you, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And so Jesus said unto him, What is written in the law? How do you read it, or how readest thou? And the lawyer answering said, Thou shalt love thy Lord, and thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And so Jesus said unto him, Thou hast answered right, this do, and thou shalt live." Simple, right? Love the Lord, love Jesus, love your neighbor, love your soul, love yourself, and with all thy strength, with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. But the lawyer, wanting to justify himself and his own beliefs, I'm assuming, because he didn't want to do all of that, said unto Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" That's a key question right there. Who is the neighbor? And Jesus answering told him a story. He starts, "A certain man went from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, all of his clothing. And they wounded him, and they departed, leaving him half dead." So basically, this guy was traveling a road. A bunch of bad guys stopped him. They beat him up real bad. They took all of his stuff, and they left him. And, left him for dead. And then, shortly after this, by chance, there came down a certain priest that way. And when the priest saw him, he passed by on the other side. He did nothing for the man. Just went on by. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and also passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw the man that had been beaten up and left for dead, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, 2 pennies, $2, whatever 2 pence are, and gave them to the host at the inn, and said unto him, Take care of this man, who was beaten up and left for dead, that the priest passed by, and that the Levite passed by. Take care of this man. And whatever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? That was Jesus' question to the lawyer. And the lawyer said, He that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go and do thou likewise. Now, there are some people who like to look at the Bible in a very literalist way. A lot of fundamentalists will do this. They want to try to take apart the words and try to bend them and twist them and form them so that it kind of says what they want it to say. You know, it's easy to say, well, the neighbor, because it doesn't specify exactly who this man was. It was just a man. It was just somebody. And so people will look at this, well, this means my neighbor, so it must mean people, you know, of my country. You know, the people who live around me are my neighbors. And I would clap back with, no. It means anybody. You know, it's, if you try to take this apart and you try to make it sound like something that, you know, you can take anything apart and try to read into it what you want it to be. But on a general view, your neighbor is anyone you pass by on the road that's in dire straits, that's begging for help. That's your neighbor. That's the person that you should help. Do that. And love thy God and love Jesus and love your soul and help your neighbor. Do that. And you live forever. That's how you show you're a follower of Christ. Let's look at another one. Since we're still in Luke, let's go a few pages over. Let's go to Luke 15. Let's tell another story about compassion and empathy. Called The Prodigal Son. Some of you might know this one. It's a little long. Let me go through this here. Try to go through this here a little quickly. So, let me paint a picture for you. So, in this chapter, Jesus is got a crowd around him, and he's telling stories. He's telling parables. Pharisees don't like it very much. They're kind of murmuring to each other on the side about it, but it's another story. But in this particular one, he tells a story of a man that had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to the father, "Father, give me a portion of goods that falleth to me." And he divided unto them his living. So the father divvied up, his stuff that he was going to give out to his sons. And because the younger son wanted it right then. And not many days after that, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into the far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. Basically, he wasted all his money doing whatever he wanted. Back then, who knows? Maybe he was riding 2 donkeys at once. Today's time, he was drinking, he was gambling, he was going out with a bunch of women. I don't know, whatever. And when he'd spent it all, there arose a mighty famine in that land where the son was, and he began to be want, which means, he was probably hungry. He was out of money, couldn't pay for anything. All his friends were gone because they just wanted his money. And so he was probably hungry and starving, barely had a roof over his head, if he did. And so he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country. And he sent him into his fields to feed swine. So he went to somebody and he said, "Hey, can I have a job, taking care of this cattle, taking care of your goats and whatever?" And the guy said, "Okay." And then the son, he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, "How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger?" So he was working for basically nothing. He was working for so little that he didn't even have enough to really make himself full. And then he's like, "Well, my father has got people working for him, and they eat plenty, they drink plenty, he takes care of them." So he figures that he's going to go the next day back to his dad, and he's going to say, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. He just wanted to go home. Poor kid just wanted to go home. He didn't care if he wasn't even his son anymore. He felt bad. He'd done all this stuff his dad probably told him he shouldn't do. And he's lost all of his money. And even if he has to go home to be a butler or a hired hand, that's better than what he's doing now. So he woke up the next day, and that's what he did. And when he was yet a great way off from his farm, he was getting close to his farm, but he was still a long ways away. His father saw him and had compassion and ran to him and fell on him and kissed his neck. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring me the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattest calf there is. We're going to eat it. We're going to be merry. We're going to have a party, because my son has come home. Now, the elder son, who was also in the field, and he came in when he heard everything was going on and saw all the music and the dancing and the festivals, and that they killed the biggest calf, and then he saw that his younger brother was home, and he was angry, and he wouldn't go in. So the father came out and asked him, what's going on? Why are you mad? Why are you upset? And so the elder son said, For these many years I have served you. I've not transgressed. I've not done anything against your words. And you never gave us me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. Not really sure what that means, honestly. I guess basically he's angry because he was the good one. He was the one that always did what his dad told him to do. And he never had any big party like this, thrown for him. And then he says, But as soon as my younger brother has come home, which has devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast cast for him the fatted calf. And so his father said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meant that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother, I thought he was dead, and he is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found. And so he's throwing a big party. So what does that mean? What does that tell you? That told me that Jesus, he didn't care. He didn't care what you did. He didn't care how long you've been gone. Because we all, in this worldview, we've all done things that we're not proud of. None of us are perfect. But the fact that we came home was all it took. And as soon as he saw us coming home, we didn't even have to make it all the way there. As soon as he saw that his son was coming, he ran out to him. He ran out to him. He grabbed him. He hugged him. He brought him home. And words like that, they mean more to me now that I have my kids of my own. Because I try to think about, I can't help but think about that and what I would do. if I thought they were gone, or I thought they weren't coming back. And then all of a sudden, there they were. I would run too. That's compassion. That's empathy. That's the love of a parent for their child. That's the love that Jesus is trying to say you should have for everyone. Because no one's perfect. No one has a perfect life, perfect circumstances. Some people might be here with a history of drug use or bad language or violence, or maybe they didn't get here the legal way, but they're here. They need help. The right thing to do, the thing that Jesus says we should do, is to show empathy, to show compassion, to hug them, put a robe on them, shoes on their feet, a ring on their finger, get the big turkey. They've come home. We're going to make them feel like home. That's how you're supposed to treat your neighbor. And for those that might say, well, that doesn't apply to everybody, let me just do one more. For this one, we got to go to the book of John. So we're going to John 8. Verses 1 through 11. Jesus on the Mountain of Olives. And in the morning, he goes to the temple. And the scribes and the Pharisees are there. And they bring him a woman who they say, who knows if it's true or not, but they say that they caught her in the very act of adultery. And they brought her to him. They say, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such people should be stoned. But what do you say? See, they were trying to tempt him. They were trying to get him to say something against this gospel that he had been teaching everyone of compassion and empathy and forgiveness. They want him to say that she had sinned and should be stoned to death. It's exactly what they want him to say. It even says in verse 6, thus they said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. Now, why did he do that? I don't know. Seems kind of odd. Anyway. So they kept asking him. And when they continued asking him, he lifted himself up and said unto them, almost, and I can almost see it. I can see someone getting annoyed. Like you got these people that keep yelling, asking questions. Finally, like, oh, fine, And Jesus said, verse 7, he that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. You might have heard this as, he who is without sin, let them cast the first stone. And they which heard it, the Pharisees, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Just him and the woman. And when Jesus lifted himself back up and saw no one but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? And she responded, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. I could talk about so many more. How Jesus feeds 5,000 people at the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 14. Jesus heals the leper, Mark 1. The healing of the paralyzed person, Mark 2. The widow's offering, Mark 12. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, in Luke 19. The afflicted woman that Jesus heals in Mark 5. The raising of Lazarus in John 11. The healing of the blind man in Mark 8. I mean, the Bible has a lot of stuff in it. And if you read it from beginning to end, and you read it really closely, which is something that I thought I did, but really I didn't do till later in life. There are lots of things in it that don't make a whole lot of sense. There are some contradictions. There are some things that don't seem very objectively morally correct that God does, especially in the Old Testament. But Jesus, far more times than not, I think has a good story and a good teaching about morality, about empathy, about compassion, about seeing people not for what we see, not the color of their skin, not the clothes they wear, or the way they walk, or the way they talk, or the way they act, or the languages they speak that maybe you don't understand. It's about seeing people for people. And I see way too many people trying to contort it into something that it is not. It's abomination. It really, it's blasphemous. You try to use Jesus as some excuse for keeping their guns or for being able to throw around vile language at people or to treat people like they're not human, not people. Talk about people like they're dogs. I mean, ain't nobody perfect. I'm not perfect. Be the first one to tell you that. But that's not the Jesus I know. Now, I got a lot of problems with this book. I do. But if people really followed Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, they didn't try to distort them, they didn't try to bend them, if they just followed the stories that Jesus tells, maybe it would be better. Certainly, if the ones who keep these Christian nationalists, certainly if the ones who kept using it for something it's not supposed to be, it would be better. Anyway, so I don't know what I want to hit on next. I guess I'll figure that out when I get there. But yeah, if people tell you that the Bible says that it's okay not to show empathy or compassion, or it's okay to treat people differently, don't believe them. Question that. Read the actual words, the red letters. It's a much different story when you actually read it. And it's one that a lot of people don't want to hear, because just like back then, the Pharisees didn't want to hear that story. They didn't want to hear that gospel. They didn't want to hear those tales about forgiveness. They wanted the law. And they wanted to be able to rule over the people. They wanted to have that power. And just as controversial as it was for Jesus to tell people to love thy neighbor then, and to treat everyone like your neighbor, and to love each other no matter what they've done, to forgive everyone, because who among us is sinless? Let them cast the first stone. The Pharisees didn't want to hear that. They wanted the law. They wanted to punish. That wasn't Jesus. That's not Jesus. But I guess I'll end with this. James chapter 2, 14 through 17. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith alone save them? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warm and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. It's very simple, people. You can say you're a Christian all you want, from daylight to dark. You can be out there praising the Lord and saying, invoking the name every other breath. But if you don't actually do something for people, if you don't show that compassion, if you don't show that empathy, if you don't do the work, it's hollow words. Saying you got a bunch of thoughts and prayers and not doing anything about it, not even trying to do anything about it, empty words. That's what he said. Anyway, maybe next time I'll talk about what Jesus thought about taking up arms in his name. Or maybe we'll talk about all this end times talk I keep hearing about. I mean, I thought the end times were going to happen back, in 1999. Jesus' apostles thought the end times were supposed to happen back when they were alive. My shorthand advice, don't worry about the end times. Worry about the now times. Let the end times take care of themselves. Anyway, we'll see how I feel when the time comes. Hope you've enjoyed this. And if you have, let me hear something about it. And if you like this kind of stuff, we'll talk about more stuff like this. But in the meantime, Spartans, stay safe, stay strong, stay compassionate. Until next time, I'm out.